Billionaire woman disguises herself as poor to find true love in the countryside. But when her secret is almost exposed, she discovers the man she likes is hiding something even bigger. Catherine Langley stood in front of the grand, floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, gazing out at the sprawling city below. The skyline glittered with a million lights, each one a reminder of her immense wealth and the life she had built. Or rather, the life that had been handed to her. Despite the opulence that surrounded her, Catherine felt a deep emptiness gnawing at her soul. The luxury that once dazzled her now felt like a gilded cage, trapping her in a world of superficiality and endless expectations. Every relationship she had ever been in seemed to revolve around her fortune, and she had grown weary of being seen as nothing more than a dollar sign. The decision to leave it all behind hadn't come easily. Catherine had spent countless nights lying awake, wrestling with the idea of abandoning the life she knew. But after yet another failed relationship, where the man she thought cared for her turned out to be just another gold digger, she knew she had to do something drastic. The heartbreak was the final straw. She couldn't bear the thought of spending the rest of her life wondering if someone truly loved her, or just the access she could provide to a world of private jets, lavish parties, and elite social circles. Determined to find something real, Catherine devised a plan that was as bold as it was risky. She would disappear, adopting a new identity and starting over in a place where no one knew her name. Catherine's heart pounded as she packed a small suitcase with simple clothes, jeans, t-shirts, a pair of worn boots. Gone were the designer labels and the perfectly tailored outfits that had become her uniform. She wanted to blend in, to be invisible in a way she had never been before. As she zipped up the bag, a wave of excitement mixed with fear washed over her. She had no idea what awaited her in the small village she had chosen, but that was the point. She was stepping into the unknown, leaving behind the comfort of predictability in search of something authentic. With her suitcase in hand, Catherine took one last look around the penthouse. The marble floors, the priceless artwork, the gleaming surfaces. It all seemed so sterile, so devoid of life. She didn't know when or if she would return. The village she chose was a world away from the city. Nestled in the heart of the countryside, it was a place untouched by the rush of modern life. The streets were lined with quaint cottages, each one with a garden bursting with flowers. Catherine, or rather Kate Lawson, as she now called herself, arrived just as the sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. She had rented a modest cabin on the edge of the village, far from the prying eyes of the few residents who lived there. The cabin was simple, with a small kitchen, a cozy living room, and a bedroom with just enough space for a bed and a dresser. It was a far cry from the luxury she was used to, but as she stepped inside, Catherine felt a sense of relief. This was what she needed, a place where she could just be, without the weight of her past. The first few days in the village were a blur of adjustment. Catherine was used to having everything at her fingertips, from personal chefs to chauffeurs. But here, she had to learn to do things for herself. She cooked her own meals, shopped at the local market, and spent her evenings reading by the fire. The villagers were friendly but reserved, treating her with a polite distance that she found refreshing. They knew nothing of Kate Lawson's past, and she was determined to keep it that way. She was just another face in the crowd, a woman who had come to the village looking for a fresh start. As Catherine settled into her new life, she found herself drawn to the simplicity of it all. The air was cleaner, the people kinder, and the pace of life slower than anything she had ever known. She spent her mornings walking through the fields, watching the sun rise over the rolling hills. The beauty of the countryside was breathtaking, and for the first time in years, Catherine felt a sense of peace. The constant noise of the city, the endless demands of her old life, seemed like a distant memory. Here, in this quiet corner of the world, she was free to be herself, whoever that was. Kate adjusted her apron nervously as she stepped into the bustling diner for her first day of work. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, mingling with the soft chatter of early morning patrons. The diner was a far cry from the high-end restaurant she once frequented, but there was something comforting about its worn booths and checkered floors. The walls were adorned with framed photographs of the village through the seasons, giving the place a warm, nostalgic feel. As she glanced around, taking in the scene, she was greeted by the friendly smile of Sarah, the diner's manager, who handed her a notepad and pencil. "Welcome, Kate. We're glad to have you on board. It's a bit hectic in the mornings, but you'll get the hang of it," Sarah said, with an encouraging nod. The first few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Kate fumbled with the coffee pot, struggling to keep up with the steady stream of orders. Her hands shook slightly as she scribbled down requests and rushed back and forth between the kitchen and the tables. The other waitresses, seasoned by years of practice, moved with effortless grace, balancing trays of food with ease. Kate, on the other hand, felt like a fish out of water, her inexperience glaringly obvious. Yet every time she made a mistake, there was someone to offer a kind word or a helpful tip. The warmth and camaraderie among the staff surprised her, and she quickly realized that this wasn't just a job to them. It was a community, a place where everyone looked out for each other. As the morning rush began to die down, Kate found herself with a moment to breathe. She leaned against the counter, wiping the sweat from her brow, when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to see a man walking in, his broad shoulders slightly hunched as if from years of hard work. He had a rugged yet approachable demeanor, with a few strands of gray in his dark hair and a pair of piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. "Morning, Sarah. The usual, please," he said, his voice deep and steady as he took a seat at the counter. Sarah glanced at Kate and gave her a quick nod, indicating that she should take his order. Kate walked over, her heart beating a little faster. There was something about this man that commanded attention, though he seemed completely unaware of it. "Good morning," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Coffee and the breakfast special, right?" He looked up at her, surprised by her familiarity. "That's right. You must be new here. I'm David," he said, extending a hand. Kate shook it, noting the roughness of his skin, a stark contrast to her own. "Kate," she replied with a small smile. "Just started today." David studied her for a moment, his gaze steady but not intrusive. "Well, welcome to the village, Kate. I hope you'll like it here," he said, his tone sincere. Over the next few days, Kate began to settle into her new routine. The work was hard, but she found a strange satisfaction in it. There was something grounding about wiping down tables, refilling coffee cups, and chatting with the regulars. The diner buzzed with life, each customer bringing their own stories and quirks, and Kate relished the chance to observe them. Despite her initial struggles, she quickly earned the respect of her co-workers with her willingness to pitch in and learn. The villagers, too, warmed to her, intrigued by the quiet, resilient woman who had come from nowhere and thrown herself into the life of the community. And then there was David. Each morning, like clockwork, he would come in for his breakfast, always sitting at the same spot at the counter. Their conversations were brief at first, just polite exchanges over coffee and eggs. But slowly, they began to open up to each other. Kate found herself looking forward to these moments, savoring the easy flow of their talks. David was unlike anyone she had known before. There was no pretense about him, no hidden agenda. He spoke of the land, of the challenges and joys of farming, and Kate found herself captivated by his stories. He had a way of seeing the world that was both practical and deeply thoughtful, and Kate couldn't help but be drawn to that. One afternoon, as Kate wiped down the counter after the lunch rush, David lingered longer than usual. "How are you finding the village so far?" he asked, his voice laced with genuine curiosity. Kate paused, thinking carefully before she answered. "It's different from what I'm used to, but in a good way. People here are real. There's a sense of connection that I haven't felt in a long time," she admitted, her eyes meeting his. David nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "That's what I love about this place. It's simple, but there's a beauty in that simplicity, don't you think?" Kate felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Yes," she replied softly. "I think I'm beginning to understand that." Kate could feel the growing connection between her and David, a bond that seemed to strengthen with each passing day. Their conversations, once polite and casual, had begun to delve into deeper topics, revealing layers of David's life that he rarely shared with others. One evening, after the diner had closed and the last of the customers had left, David stayed behind to help Kate stack chairs. As they worked side by side in the quiet of the empty diner, he began to talk about his farm, his voice tinged with a mix of pride and worry. "The land has been in my family for generations," David said, pausing to wipe his hands on a rag. "It's not just a job for me. It's my legacy. But things have been tough lately." Kate listened intently as David described the struggles he was facing. A string of bad harvests, coupled with rising costs, had left him with mounting debts that he was struggling to pay off. The farm, which had once been the pride of his family, was now on the brink of collapse. Yet, despite the challenges, there was a determination in David's voice that stirred something deep within her. He spoke with a passion that she admired, a dedication to the land that reminded her of the way she used to feel about her own life before it had been overshadowed by wealth and status. "I won't give up on it," David continued, his blue eyes shining with resolve. "This farm is all I have, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep it going." As David spoke, Kate found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't expected. His honesty, his vulnerability, and his unwavering commitment to his family's legacy resonated with her own yearning for something real, something that couldn't be bought or sold. She realized that David's struggles were a reflection of her own in a different way. Both of them were fighting to hold on to something that mattered deeply to them. The difference was that David's battle was one of survival, while hers was a search for meaning. She admired his strength and the quiet dignity with which he faced his challenges, and she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of admiration and something more. In the days that followed, Kate found herself spending more and more time with David, both at the diner and on the farm. He would often invite her to visit, showing her around the sprawling fields and the old weathered barns that held so much history. Kate was struck by the beauty of the land, even in its current state of disrepair. There was a raw, untamed quality to the farm that she found captivating, a stark contrast to the polished, artificial world she had left behind. She could see why David was so passionate about it, and as she walked beside him, listening to his hopes and dreams for the future, she felt a sense of belonging that she hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, as they sat together on a grassy hill overlooking the fields, David opened up to Kate in a way he never had before. "I dream of restoring this place," he said, his voice soft but filled with determination. "I want to bring it back to what it was, to make my family proud. But I know it's going to take a lot of work and time, and maybe more than I can do on my own." Kate could hear the uncertainty in his voice, the unspoken fear that he might not succeed. She turned to him, her heart aching for the man who had given so much of himself to this land. "You'll do it," she said quietly, placing a hand on his arm. "I believe in you, David. You have the strength and the vision to make it happen." David looked at her, his eyes searching hers as if trying to understand the depth of her belief in him. "You really think so?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability creeping into his tone. Kate nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I do," she replied, her voice steady. "And I want to help, if you'll let me." David smiled, a slow, genuine smile that lit up his face. "I'd like that, Kate. I'd like that a lot." As they sat there, the sun dipping low on the horizon, Kate felt a wave of warmth wash over her. She wanted nothing more than to be a part of David's world, to build something real and lasting with him. But the nagging fear of her deception lingered in the back of her mind, a shadow that threatened to darken the happiness she was beginning to feel. The more time Kate spent with David, the more she found herself falling for him. His kindness, his strength, his unwavering sense of purpose. Everything about him drew her in. Yet, with each passing day, the weight of her secret grew heavier. She knew that she couldn't keep pretending forever, but the thought of losing David, of shattering the fragile connection they had built, was unbearable. She often found herself lying awake at night, torn between the happiness she had found in the village and the fear of what would happen if David learned the truth. It was a constant battle, one that left her feeling more conflicted than ever before. As the summer days stretched into autumn, Kate knew that a reckoning was coming. She couldn't continue to deceive David, not when he had opened up to her in ways that few ever had. She had to tell him the truth, but the thought of doing so filled her with dread. What if he saw her as just another rich woman playing a game, using his life as an escape from her own? What if he turned his back on her, the way others had done when they learned of her wealth? Kate's heart ached at the thought, but she knew that she couldn't go on living a lie. She owed it to David and to herself to be honest, no matter the cost. Back in the city, the absence of Catherine Langley had not gone unnoticed. Whispers of her sudden disappearance rippled through the elite circles she once dominated, leaving her family and business associates in a state of confusion. Catherine's decision to vanish without a trace was both shocking and mystifying. Her family, used to her fierce independence, assumed she needed space to clear her head after her latest romantic disappointment. Business associates, on the other hand, speculated about the reasons behind her retreat, though none dared to pry too deeply, respecting her privacy as much as they could. The media, however, was another matter entirely. Speculation about her whereabouts filled the gossip columns, but one journalist, Brian Tate, sensed that there was more to the story than just a wealthy heiress seeking solitude. Brian Tate was a sharp, ambitious reporter with a knack for uncovering secrets. His career had been built on stories that others had dismissed as unimportant, only for him to expose the real news lurking beneath the surface. When Catherine Langley dropped off the map, Brian saw not just a story, but an opportunity to make a name for himself on a national scale. He began his investigation by combing through Catherine's recent activities, searching for any clue that might hint at where she had gone. Her last known public appearance was weeks ago, and after that, it was as if she had vanished into thin air. But Brian was nothing if not persistent. He sifted through every detail, from social media posts to bank transactions, slowly piecing together the puzzle. It wasn't long before Brian's research led him to the small, nondescript village, miles away from the city's glittering skyline. The idea that someone like Catherine Langley would be hiding out in such a place seemed absurd to most. But Brian's gut told him he was on the right track. Armed with little more than a hunch and a few vague leads, he drove out to the village, determined to uncover the truth. As he arrived, he was struck by the stark contrast between the bustling city life he knew and the serene simplicity of the countryside. The village, with its quaint cottages and winding roads, seemed an unlikely place for a woman like Catherine to find refuge. But if she was here, he intended to find her. Brian began his search subtly, chatting with the locals, under the guise of a traveler interested in the area. He quickly learned that newcomers were a rare sight in the village, and his inquiries soon led him to the diner where Kate worked. The locals spoke warmly of the new waitress, Kate Lawson, a woman who had arrived out of nowhere and quickly become part of the community. Brian's curiosity was piqued. The description of Kate, though vague, matched what he imagined Catherine might look like if she were trying to stay under the radar. He decided to pay a visit to the diner, hoping to catch a glimpse of this mysterious newcomer. As Kate served customers at the diner that morning, she noticed a man she had never seen before sitting quietly at one of the tables. He was clean-cut, with an air of sharpness about him that seemed out of place in the village. There was something in the way he watched the room that made her uneasy, as if he were looking for something or someone. She pushed the feeling aside, reminding herself that strangers occasionally passed through the village. But as she approached his table to take his order, her unease grew. "What can I get for you today?" she asked, forcing a smile. The man looked up, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "Just coffee, thanks," he replied, his tone polite but guarded. Brian's mind raced as he watched Kate. There was something familiar about her, but he couldn't quite place it. Her mannerisms, the way she moved, it all seemed just a little too polished for a small-town waitress. As she poured his coffee, he noticed a flicker of recognition in her eyes, quickly masked by a practiced smile. He decided to push a little further. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked casually, taking a sip of the steaming coffee. Kate's heart skipped a beat. She had prepared herself for questions, but the directness of his inquiry caught her off guard. "No, I'm not," she replied, keeping her tone light. "Just moved here a few months ago." Kate's instincts told her that this man was dangerous, though she couldn't pinpoint why. As she continued serving customers, she kept a wary eye on him, noticing how he chatted with the other patrons, asking questions that seemed innocent on the surface, but were anything but. She knew it was only a matter of time before he started digging deeper, and the thought terrified her. Her life here, the simple, peaceful existence she had come to cherish, was hanging by a thread. The growing fear of being exposed gnawed at her, and she realized she needed to act fast to protect the fragile world she had built. As the day wore on, Kate found it harder to concentrate. The pressure of keeping up the facade, of pretending everything was fine while knowing that it wasn't, was almost unbearable. She had to find a way to keep her secret safe, but she didn't know how long she could hold off Brian's relentless curiosity. The stakes had never been higher, and as the sun set over the village, Kate knew she was running out of time. Kate couldn't shake the anxiety gnawing at her. Brian's presence in the village had unsettled her more than she cared to admit, and the strain of keeping her true identity a secret was beginning to wear on her. One evening, after the diner had closed and the last of the customers had trickled out, she lingered behind, her nerves frayed. Maggie, the diner's no-nonsense cook, noticed Kate's unusual quietness and concern etched across her face. Maggie was a woman of few words, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. "Something's on your mind, Kate," she said, wiping her hands on a dish rag as she approached. "You've been jumpy all day." Kate hesitated, glancing around the empty diner. The walls, usually comforting in their familiarity, now felt like they were closing in on her. She had kept her secret buried for so long, but now, with Brian digging around, she felt trapped. She looked at Maggie, whose lined face and gray-streaked hair gave her a motherly air. Maggie had been nothing but kind to her, offering guidance and a listening ear when Kate had first arrived. If there was anyone she could trust, it was Maggie. Taking a deep breath, Kate decided to confide in her. "Maggie, there's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I haven't been completely honest about who I am." Maggie raised an eyebrow but remained silent, waiting for Kate to continue. Kate hesitated again, then plunged ahead, knowing there was no turning back. "My real name isn't Kate Lawson," she admitted, her words coming out in a rush. "I'm Catherine Langley, the heiress." Maggie blinked, her expression shifting from surprise to something softer, more understanding. She didn't speak right away, letting the weight of Kate's confession settle between them. Finally, she sighed and shook her head. "Well, I'll be," she said quietly. "I knew there was something different about you, but I never would have guessed this." The relief of finally sharing her secret with someone was overwhelming, and Kate felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Maggie's reaction, calm and unjudging, was more than she could have hoped for. "I'm so sorry for lying," Kate whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I needed to get away from everything, to find out who I am without all the money and expectations. But now I'm afraid that if people find out the truth, it'll ruin everything I've built here, especially with David." Maggie reached out and placed a comforting hand on Kate's arm. "You don't have to apologize, dear," she said gently. "I can understand why you did it. And don't worry, your secret is safe with me." But Maggie's tone grew more serious as she added, "Just remember, Kate, secrets have a way of coming out eventually. It might be better to tell David yourself before he finds out from someone else." The thought of coming clean to David filled Kate with dread. She couldn't bear the idea of him looking at her with disappointment, or worse, betrayal. Yet Maggie's words rang true. Honesty was the foundation of any real relationship, and Kate knew she couldn't keep hiding forever. But how could she explain everything without sounding like she had been toying with his feelings all along? The dilemma gnawed at her, the fear of losing David battling with the knowledge that she owed him the truth. As the days passed, Kate's internal conflict only deepened. Her feelings for David were growing stronger with each moment they spent together. His kindness, his dedication to his farm, and his unassuming nature had won her over completely. She found herself looking forward to their quiet evenings together, whether they were sitting on his porch watching the sunset or sharing stories over a simple meal. David's presence had become a comfort, a constant in the whirlwind of her emotions. But with each passing day, the guilt of her deception grew heavier, casting a shadow over the happiness she had found in the village. Kate often found herself replaying Maggie's words in her mind. She knew the older woman was right. She couldn't keep the truth from David forever. But every time she tried to muster the courage to tell him, her fears overwhelmed her. What if he saw her as nothing more than a spoiled rich girl playing a cruel game? What if everything they had built crumbled to dust the moment she revealed who she really was? The thought was unbearable, and yet the burden of her secret was becoming too much to carry alone. Kate felt trapped, caught between the desire to protect what she had found with David and the need to be honest with the man she was falling in love with. The air was thick with the golden warmth of the setting sun as Kate and David strolled along the riverbank. The village was quiet, the only sounds coming from the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze and the soft murmur of the water as it flowed over smooth stones. The scene was peaceful, almost dreamlike, and for a moment, Kate allowed herself to forget the turmoil that had been building inside her. Beside her, David walked in his usual steady manner, his hands tucked into the pockets of his worn jeans. They had spent the day working hard, Kate at the diner and David tending to his struggling farm, and now, this time together, felt like a well-earned respite. As they reached a small clearing by the water's edge, David stopped and turned to look at Kate. The setting sun bathed his face in a warm glow, highlighting the lines of hard work and the sincerity in his eyes. "You know, Kate," he began, his voice low and thoughtful, "since you came here, things have felt different, better, somehow." His gaze was steady, but there was a vulnerability in it that made Kate's heart ache. She could sense the weight of what he was about to say, and her own feelings mirrored his. "I've come to really value our time together," he continued, almost hesitantly, as if searching for the right words. "I don't just mean as friends either. I feel there's something more between us." Kate's heart raced as David's words sank in. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed to stand still. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the confirmation that David felt the same way she did. But as joy surged through her, it was quickly followed by the crushing realization that she had been living a lie. The perfect, peaceful moment they were sharing was tainted by the secret she carried. She could no longer keep it from him, not when his feelings were laid bare. The weight of her deception pressed down on her, and she knew she couldn't let it go on any longer. Taking a deep breath, Kate gathered her courage. "David, there's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice trembling with the gravity of what she was about to reveal. She could see the concern in his eyes as he turned fully to face her, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "I haven't been completely honest with you about who I am." Kate struggled to find the right words, to explain everything without losing the man she had come to care for so deeply. "My name isn't really Kate Lawson," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's Catherine Langley." But before Kate could explain further, a sharp voice cut through the quiet evening. "There you are, Catherine Langley." Kate and David both turned, startled, to see Brian Tate emerging from the trees. His expression was triumphant, and he walked toward them with the confident stride of someone who knew he held all the cards. "I've been looking for you for quite some time," Brian said, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the scoop. "You didn't think you could just disappear and no one would notice, did you?" His words were laced with a smugness that made Kate's stomach churn. David's face paled as he looked between Kate and Brian, confusion and disbelief battling for dominance in his expression. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice strained. "Who is this guy? And why is he calling you Catherine?" Kate's heart sank as she saw the trust they had built crumbling before her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, to try and explain, but Brian was quicker. "This, my friend, is Catherine Langley," he announced, enjoying the drama of the moment. "Billionaire heiress, one of the richest women in the country, and she's been hiding out here, pretending to be, some small-town waitress?" David's eyes widened as the truth hit him, and he took a step back, as if needing distance to process the revelation. "Is this true, Kate?" he asked, though the question was almost redundant now. Kate's breath caught in her throat as she saw the hurt in his eyes. She had feared this moment for so long, and now it was happening in the worst possible way. "David, she started, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she possibly explain herself now, with everything out in the open like this? The peaceful world they had shared was shattered, the pieces scattered at their feet. For a moment, there was only silence, thick and suffocating. David's expression was a mix of pain and betrayal, and Kate could see the walls going up around his heart. The connection they had forged was breaking, and it was all her fault. "I trusted you," David said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The weight of his words was crushing, and Kate felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had lost him, the one person who had ever made her feel truly seen. All she could do now was stand there, helpless, as everything she had fought to protect came crashing down around her. As David turned and walked away, Kate felt the ground drop out from beneath her. The air was thick with the echoes of Brian's cruel revelation, and the silence that followed was more suffocating than any words could have been. The warmth of the evening sun, which had felt so comforting just moments before, now seemed to mock her. She watched David's retreating figure, her heart breaking with each step he took. The weight of her deception bore down on her, and she was left standing alone, feeling more isolated than ever in the place that had once felt like a sanctuary. The reality of what she had lost hit her with brutal clarity. She had not only betrayed David, but had also destroyed the fragile life she had built in the village. Brian, sensing the vulnerability in the moment, stepped forward with a predatory gleam in his eye. "Catherine, this could be your chance to set the record straight," he suggested, his voice slick with false sympathy. "An exclusive interview. Your side of the story. The world will want to know why you did this." His words were like poison, each one twisting the knife deeper into the wound that was already gaping wide. But Kate had no interest in becoming fodder for the tabloids, no desire to be the subject of public spectacle. All she could think about was David, the look on his face as he walked away, the trust she had shattered. "No, Brian," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper but firm. "There's nothing I want to say to you. Please, just leave me alone." She turned away from him, her chest tight with a mix of shame and determination. There was only one thing she could focus on now: making things right with David. But even as she clung to that hope, she couldn't ignore the looks she was starting to receive from the villagers who had once welcomed her with open arms. Whispers and side glances followed her as she made her way back to her small cabin, each one a painful reminder of how quickly everything had changed. The village that had once felt like home was now a place of judgment and cold stares, and Kate felt every bit of it. That night, sleep was impossible. Kate tossed and turned, her mind racing with thoughts of how to fix the damage she had caused. She knew she had to see David, to explain everything and hope against hope that he might understand. The morning came, bringing with it a gray sky that matched the heaviness in her heart. Without wasting any time, she made her way to David's farm, her steps heavy with both fear and resolve. The familiar path felt longer than ever, each step echoing with the uncertainty of what awaited her. When she arrived, she found David already at work in the fields, his figure hunched and distant as he toiled under the overcast sky. Kate stood at the edge of the field, watching him for a moment, gathering the courage she needed. She took a deep breath and walked toward him, her heart pounding in her chest. "David," she called softly, her voice carrying across the empty space between them. He straightened up and turned to face her, his expression unreadable, his eyes guarded. Kate felt a fresh wave of guilt wash over her as she approached, stopping a few feet away. "I'm so sorry," she began, her voice trembling with emotion. "I never meant to hurt you, David. I never wanted to lie to you, but I was scared that if you knew who I really was, you'd see me differently, that you wouldn't believe that my feelings for you are real." David listened in silence, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. Kate could see the hurt in his eyes, the betrayal that her deception had caused. It tore at her, knowing that she was the cause of his pain. She took a step closer, desperate to make him understand. "David, I came here because I was tired of being judged by my wealth, of people only seeing the money and not the person behind it. I found something real with you, something I've never had before, but I was too afraid to trust that you'd still want me if you knew the truth." Her voice cracked with the weight of her confession, and she felt tears stinging her eyes. "Please believe me, David. I'm not Catherine Langley here. I'm just Kate, and I love you." For a long moment, David said nothing. His gaze was steady, but his thoughts were a storm of confusion and hurt. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet and measured. "Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me the truth from the beginning, Kate? Didn't you think I could handle it? That I could see past the money to the person you are?" His questions cut deep, and Kate struggled to find the words to answer. How could she explain the fear that had driven her to hide the truth? How could she make him see that it was her own insecurities, not a lack of trust in him, that had led her down this path? "I was wrong," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I should have told you, but I was so afraid of losing you. And now I realize I might have lost you anyway." She looked at him, her heart laid bare. "Please, David, give me a chance to make this right. I don't care about the money or my old life. I care about you." David stared at her. The turmoil in his heart mirrored in his eyes. Kate could see that he was struggling, that he wanted to believe her, but the hurt was too fresh, too raw. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of all that had been said and all that had been left unsaid. Kate stood in front of David, her heart aching as his words echoed in her mind. She had been so consumed by the fear that her wealth would change everything that she hadn't stopped to consider how much more damage her deception would cause. "I thought that if you knew who I really was, you'd see me differently," she explained, her voice trembling with emotion. "I didn't want my money to come between us. I was afraid that once you knew, you'd think I was just some spoiled rich girl playing at being poor." She paused, searching his eyes for any sign of understanding. But David's expression remained guarded, his jaw clenched with the weight of his own feelings. "It's not the money, Kate," David said quietly, the disappointment clear in his tone. "It's that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. You made that decision for me, deciding I couldn't handle it. But I'm not angry because you're rich. I'm angry because you didn't believe in what we had." His words cut through her like a knife, and Kate realized just how deeply she had hurt him. She had spent so long hiding behind her fear of rejection that she hadn't given him the chance to prove her wrong. "I thought I was protecting what we had," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "But I see now that I was only protecting myself." David sighed, running a hand through his hair as he looked out over the fields. The silence between them was heavy, filled with all the things they wished they had said sooner. "I still care about you, Kate," he admitted, his voice softer now, though the pain was still evident. "But trust isn't something that just comes back overnight. It's going to take time to rebuild what's been broken." Kate nodded, tears finally spilling over. She knew he was right. She had betrayed his trust, and that wasn't something that could be easily repaired. But the fact that he was still willing to talk to her, to admit that he still had feelings for her, gave her a small glimmer of hope. Just when the silence seemed to stretch on forever, David spoke again, his voice carrying a weight of its own. "There's something I need to tell you too," he began, his eyes locking onto hers. Kate blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in his tone. She had been so wrapped up in her own fears and insecurities that she hadn't considered that David might have his own secrets. "The farm, it's more than just a family legacy," he continued, his gaze steady but intense. "It's valuable land, Kate, not just to me, but in real financial terms. With the right investment, it could be incredibly successful." Kate's breath caught in her throat as she processed what he was saying. She had known the farm was struggling, but she had never imagined it had the potential David was describing. "Then why haven't you?" she began, but David cut her off, his voice tinged with a mixture of frustration and vulnerability. Because I didn't want people to think I was just looking for a handout, he confessed. I've seen what money does to people, how it changes the way they look at you. I didn't want anyone's help if it wasn't coming from a place of genuine care. I didn't want to be seen as some charity case. In that moment, Kate realized how much they were alike. Both of them had been hiding. Both of them had let fear dictate their actions. She saw now that David, too, had been protecting himself, not from her, but from the world's assumptions and judgments. They had both worn masks, afraid to show their true selves for fear of being rejected or misunderstood. "David," she said softly, her voice filled with empathy, "I understand now. We've both been hiding behind our fears, but maybe it's time we stopped hiding and started trusting each other. I want to help you, not because of the money, but because I believe in you and what you're trying to do here." David looked at her, his expression softening as he took in her words. For the first time since the confrontation, there was a flicker of something close to hope in his eyes. "You really mean that?" he asked, his voice cautious but sincere. Kate nodded, stepping closer to him, her heart full of resolve. "Yes, I do. I believe in us, David, and I want to prove that I'm not the person you think I am. I'm just Kate, and I want to build something real with you, if you'll let me." David's gaze held hers for a long moment, the tension between them slowly dissolving as they stood together, two people who had finally laid their fears bare. The path ahead of them wouldn't be easy. They both knew that. But in that moment, as they stood on the land that meant so much to both of them, there was a sense of understanding, of mutual respect, and a shared commitment to something greater than either of them could have imagined. They were no longer just David, the farmer, and Kate, the billionaire heiress. They were simply two people, each with their own dreams and fears, willing to take a chance on each other. Kate and David stood in the middle of the field, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land that now felt as much hers as it did his. The tension that had hung between them for days seemed to dissipate in the cool evening air, replaced by a tentative hope. "I want to start over," Kate said softly, her eyes locked on David's. "This time, with no secrets. Let's build something real together, without the fear of who we are or where we come from holding us back." Her voice was steady, but her heart raced, knowing that everything depended on his response. David looked at her for a long moment, the emotions warring in his eyes. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust again, but the fear of relying on someone only to be disappointed still lingered. "I'm not looking for a handout, Kate," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "I don't want people thinking I'm just using you for your money. This farm, it's more than just land to me, it's my family's legacy." Kate nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "I know," she replied, stepping closer to him, "and I'm not offering a handout. I'm offering a partnership. We work together to bring this farm back to life. You know the land, and I have the resources. But more importantly, I believe in you, David. This isn't about the money. It's about creating something meaningful together." David's gaze softened as he listened to her, the sincerity in her voice cutting through his doubts. He realized that this was as much about her finding a place where she truly belonged as it was about him saving the farm. They were both searching for the same thing, a sense of purpose, a place where they could be themselves without fear or pretense. "All right," he said after a moment, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Let's do this, together." Relief flooded through Kate, and she couldn't help but smile back. This was the beginning of something new, something real, and it filled her with a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. The days that followed were filled with hard work, but also with a growing sense of camaraderie and understanding. Kate threw herself into the tasks at hand, learning about the intricacies of farming from David and his small team of workers. She was a quick learner, and though the work was physically demanding, she found a strange kind of joy in it. Each day brought new challenges, but also new victories, small signs that the farm was beginning to turn around. And with each passing day, the bond between her and David grew stronger, built not on deception or fear, but on mutual respect and a shared vision for the future. The villagers, who had initially been wary of Kate after Brian's revelation, began to see her in a new light. They watched as she worked alongside David, getting her hands dirty and doing whatever needed to be done to help the farm thrive. Slowly but surely, the gossip and judgment started to fade, replaced by a grudging respect. People began to talk less about the fact that she was a billionaire and more about how dedicated she was to the farm and to David. Maggie, who had been Kate's confidant from the beginning, was the first to extend a hand in friendship once more, and soon others followed. The village, which had once felt like a hostile environment, was becoming home again. As for Brian, he watched from a distance as Kate and David rebuilt their lives together. The story he had been chasing no longer seemed as important as it once had. He could see that what Kate and David were creating was something rare and precious, something that didn't deserve to be torn apart for the sake of a headline. One afternoon, as he sat in his car on the outskirts of the village, he made the decision to walk away. He wouldn't publish the story. Instead, he would leave them in peace, allowing them the chance to find the happiness they had worked so hard to achieve. With that decision made, Brian drove away, the last threat to Kate and David's future disappearing into the distance. With Brian gone, a sense of peace settled over the village. The tension that had gripped Kate and David's lives for so long finally eased, and they were able to focus on the future they were building together. The farm began to thrive under their combined efforts, each new day bringing them closer to the dream they both shared. And as the seasons changed, so too did their relationship, deepening and growing stronger with each passing moment. They had faced their fears, their deceptions, and their insecurities, and had come out the other side not only stronger, but more united than ever. Together, they had found something that neither of them had ever truly believed was possible: a love built on trust, honesty, and a shared vision for the future. The farm buzzed with life, a testament to the hard work and dedication that Kate and David had poured into it over the past months. The fields, once barren and struggling, were now lush and fertile, bursting with the promise of a bountiful harvest. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden light over the land, bathing everything in a serene glow. Kate stood at the edge of the field, watching as David worked alongside the other farmhands, his movements steady and assured. There was a sense of peace in the air, a quiet fulfillment that settled over them like a soft blanket. For the first time in a long while, Kate felt truly at home. David looked up from his work and caught sight of Kate watching him. A smile spread across his face, one that spoke of contentment and a love that had only deepened with time. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand and made his way over to her, the easy rhythm of his steps reflecting the calm that had settled in his heart. "Looks like the farm's gonna do well this year," he said as he reached her, his voice filled with a quiet pride. Kate nodded, her eyes reflecting the warmth she felt. "It's more than I ever could have imagined," she replied softly. "We did this together, David. We've built something real here." They stood side by side, gazing out over the fields that they had nurtured back to life, the hardships they had faced, the doubts, the fears, the secrets, seemed distant now, like shadows that had melted away in the light of the love they had found. "You know," David began, his tone thoughtful, "I never thought I'd find someone who would understand this life, let alone want to be a part of it. But you've shown me that it's not about what we have, but who we have by our side." Kate turned to him, her heart swelling with love. "And you've shown me that true wealth isn't about money or status. It's about the connections we make, the trust we build, and the love we share." Their journey had not been easy, but it had been worth every challenge. They had learned to trust one another, to lean on each other, and to face the world together, unafraid. The village, once wary of Kate's true identity, now accepted her as one of their own, seeing the genuine care she had for the farm and for David. The rumors and judgments had faded, replaced by admiration for the couple who had defied the odds. Their story became something of a quiet legend in the village, a tale of love that had grown stronger in the face of adversity, rooted deeply in the soil of the life they had chosen to build together. As the seasons changed, so did their love. It blossomed like the crops they tended, growing stronger and more resilient with each passing day. The farm, once on the brink of collapse, now thrived under their care, a living symbol of their commitment to each other and to the life they had created. And in the quiet moments, when the work was done and the sun dipped low in the sky, Kate and David would stand together, hand in hand, taking in the beauty of the world they had made their own. There was no longer any need for pretense or fear, only the deep, abiding love that had brought them together and would carry them forward. Kate no longer felt the need to hide who she was, to be anyone other than the woman who had fallen in love with a man and a way of life that had changed her forever. David, too, had shed his fears, no longer worried about how others saw him or his farm. They had both discovered that the greatest wealth they could ever possess was each other. In their love, they had found a home, a place where they belonged, not just to the land or the village, but to each other's hearts. They had built a life that was rich in the things that truly mattered: trust, honesty, and a love that had weathered every storm. As they stood there, looking out over the fields that had once been a source of worry and now brought them only pride, Kate knew that they had found something far more valuable than anything money could buy. They had found each other, and in doing so, they had found their true home. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Now, how about another one? To watch another nice story, just click on the video appearing on your screen.